Okay, can you hear me? Am I mic'd? Yes or no? Yes? Can you hear me in the back? You're good? So I'm Kelly Shaw. I'm from Math and Computer Science. I'm in the computer science side of things. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what I do with my students when they do research. But I'm also going to tell you a little bit about why I do it and why I think it's fun. But first I have a question for you. What do you all think computer scientists do? Does anything pop into your head? Stare at a computer all day. Some days, yes, in fact I do, but I bet you stare at a computer all day, a lot of days too. Do you guys use computers in the work that you do?
Yeah.
You do, so even in the chemistry labs, they are also using computers. So I do stare at a computer a fair amount. Does anyone know about programming? A lot of people, okay, yes, a couple of you have probably also taken computer programming classes. Part of what I do some days is programming, but that's not all that I do. So a lot of what I do has to do with creating stuff. So do y'all like creating stuff? What do you create? I know when you're at school it's a little bit harder, you have less time, right? So I bake. Anybody else bake? Okay. So we should get together. There we go. Some of us, who paints? Anybody paint? No. Build stuff?
Anybody knit?
Knit? See, we've got some knitters back there. You need to start a group. Okay. So I like having a creative sort of outlet in my life. I also really like to solve problems. In particular, I like any type of problem to solve, but I just remember growing up, they would give us like these extra credit math problems that I really enjoyed. Kathy says, yeah, those are great. I remember once when I was in 3rd grade, going to bed, not being able to solve the extra credit problem, and staying awake and coming down an hour later. I had been in bed, and I had solved the problem, and I ran downstairs really quickly to write it down, right? Because I just love solving problems. So when I figured out what I wanted to do in my life, I really wanted to say, okay, can I be creative and can I solve problems at the same time? And that, I think, is what I do in my lab or for research all the time. I get to solve problems, but I get to do it creatively. And because I get to do 2 things I really like, I enjoy what I'm doing. The added bonus is I get to interact with students, which is even more fun. So, because I get to see them actually enjoying stuff. So, my next question is, if you thought about what we do with computers, I bet you could think of a lot of things. So what are you doing right now on your Mac?
I'm taking notes.
You're taking notes, so you're doing word processing. Does anyone have an iPhone? Okay, you do as well. You're very into Mac. Apparently, Apple stuff. Okay, so you have an iPhone, so you talk on the phone, but iPhones do more than just talking, right? So they probably have a GPS they have a compass. Everybody knows about the compass, right? You can play video games, right? But you guys use computers in your lab. What do you use them for?
To analyze our data.
To analyze your data. So computers are used for scientific reasons as well. They're used for purchasing, like Amazon. Who bought their books for class this year on Amazon? Yeah, okay, me too. Well, the ones I didn't get free. There's also things, we instant message with one another. We can look for extraterrestrial life if we want to. We can model, earthquakes and so forth. These are all things we do with computers. So that's another neat thing about computer science is it sort of stretches into everything. Right? Mathematicians use it, scientists use it, companies who are trying to make money on Wall Street use computers. In fact, many of the people they hire are in fact people with advanced degrees in math and computer science. We've kind of had a negative response to that lately, but computers are used in a wide area of everything, and so we have to figure out how to construct the computers for the different types of jobs. Playing video games is not exactly the same thing as word processing. You don't need the same sort of capability. Does anyone have, for example, is anyone a gamer? No. Okay, he is. He's willing to. I'm not either, but that's because I get addicted. So, do you have like a desktop machine that you have designed for playing games?
At home, yeah.
At home, yeah. So he probably has a much more powerful graphics card for gaming
Sure, yeah.
than he needs at school because he's just maybe writing some papers and that sort of stuff. And the reason he has different hardware is because what is needed in order to produce graphics is very different from what's needed in order to be able to write, a document on Microsoft Word. Okay, so what do computer architects do? Well, in order to serve all of these different applications, we have to figure out what are the traits of those applications. So for example, Microsoft Word is very text-based, and it doesn't really need to work any faster than you can work, right? Versus games have to change what you're seeing many, many, many times per second. So they have to produce a lot of data very quickly. Things like protein folding involve lots and lots of number crunching, okay, and very long simulations, very little interactivity, right? You don't type while you're doing protein folding. And for example, Google is another example. They have lots and lots of data that you have to be able to search really quickly. You don't really have to search for data in your games all that often. At least not in the games that I play. And when I did play, there was nothing like that, okay? So they're very different applications have very different traits, and what I get to do is try and match the applications to the architecture. So, for example, protein folding is something that's very computationally expensive. So we would actually end up, well, okay, I've got the order wrong. Microsoft Word, we do on your laptops. You are taking notes. Are you using Word?
Yes.
You are, even though you're on a Mac.
Yes.
Okay. So clearly, music, you play on your iTunes, which is a computer. And protein folding is something we would do on a supercomputer. Okay? How many of you have heard of supercomputers before? Oh, most of you. Did you hear that there's a new one that's coming out in China that's should be ranked at the top of the board? Very exciting stuff. Okay. So, as a computer architect, I have to solve a bunch of problems. I have to solve the problem of what are the traits of these applications? How much data do they use? How do they use the data? Do they look at it once and throw it away, or do they crunch on it for a long period of time, meaning doing computations on it lots? What type of operations? Are they doing stuff where, what do normal people call things after a decimal point? Like 3.14, what do you call that type of number, Kathy?
You say decimal?
If you have 3.14, what do normal people call that? I call that a floating point number, but is that what normal people call it?
Decimal.
Decimal number? Okay, decimal number. I'm sorry, in computer science we call them floating point numbers, and I know that's not what normal people call them, but I've been doing it for so long that I don't know what they're called anymore, okay? So, am I going to be working on things with a fractional component, or am I going to be working on characters? That's going to impact what my hardware needs to do. So I have to figure out what the traits are of the applications I'm going to run, and then I need to figure out, this is the creative side, I need to figure out how to construct an architecture that works really, really, really well for that specific type of application. Okay? Because, for example, if you try and run a game on your laptop, it probably doesn't run as fast as his desktop computer at home. So the types of applications I look at with my students are applications that actually access a whole bunch of data, okay? They're frequently called data mining applications. So for example, when you went to buy your textbooks at Amazon, okay, they probably gave you a few suggestions about what else you might like to buy. So when you bought your textbook did you buy a textbook?
I didn't buy it.
You didn't buy it? Who bought a textbook? Okay, who would like to volunteer which textbook they bought? Chemistry? Did you get offerings of other chemistry books? Okay, you did. So what Amazon had done is they had looked over all their product lists, or actually all their sales over time, and also what you had people in the past had clicked on. If they looked at one chemistry book, they might have looked at another, and so forth. And then they created this information, searched it, because they have huge, huge databases, in order to come up with suggestions for you. This doesn't always work for me because a lot of times when I go on Amazon, I go shopping for friends who have had babies. And I don't have babies, okay? So I go on there and I'm like going to buy something that's not for a baby, and I get all these suggestions about baby stuff. And I'm like, no, that's only when there's a new baby, or kind of thing. So it doesn't always work particularly well for me. Netflix is another company that gives you suggestions, right? Probably none of you do Netflix, right? Yeah. I do Netflix, but I only watch one movie a month or so. Yeah. But they try and give you suggestions about what to look at. And then companies also try and figure out, well, what am I going to sell? Or, what time of the year do I sell products? When should I put them out? What products should I put next to these other products? Like beer and diapers. Everybody knows that one, right? Like when people go in for diapers, they also go in for beer. They're just going in for 2 items. You didn't know that? So you put them together at the end of an aisle, right? So this is, by studying data, this is what you get. So that's the type of applications I look at. The type of architectures, computer architectures I look at, are ones where we actually have many different processors working together. So you guys, have you heard of the Core 2 Duo processing chip? Some of you have. Some of you might have them in your machines. There's also an i7 out now, that's in your machine. What? It's not in your machine, you've just heard of it. I was going to say, nice machine. So it used to be the case that when you had a computer, you had a single processor in your computer. And then the way the technology has gone, we keep shrinking things more and more. We then were able to put 2 in your computer. Now, for the mainstream people, we can put 4, and that number is increasing. And as we put more processors on there, we have to have them interact with one another. So what I do is look at ways to construct those sort of chips with many processors and how to get them to interact nicely. So they play nice and they try and help one another, all the processors help one another along in order to get the best performance. So what types of issues do we care about? Well, speed is always important, right? If it can happen faster, that'd be better, right? I mean, how often do you do something and be like, oh, that was too fast? Like on a computer, like when you go, as you were talking about before, when you go into the classrooms here that have computers in them, do you ever turn them on and say, oh my God, that was so fast. I can't believe that I'm not ready to enter my password. It doesn't happen, right? Like, so speed is always gonna be good. How do we reduce power consumption? That's one of the issues we have. Do any of you ever leave a laptop on and then, like on your bare legs during the summer, gets a little toasty? Yeah, you get like nice little marks. Well, power consumption is a big problem, not just for burning your legs. And if you go on YouTube, you can see pictures of batteries catching on fire and so forth. Doesn't happen all that often, but a couple years ago there were a few problems. But power consumption is also a problem for companies that have lots of computers, okay? Like Google. You know where Google moves its sites? To small little farm areas that have a power plant, right? Because they can basically get all the energy from the power plant because nobody else wants it. And so that's where they have to move because they need so much power in order to feed all of their machines. This isn't good, right? Power is expensive and there's a limited amount of ways to produce it. So power consumption, reducing power consumption is important. And last thing is, who knows about the blue screen of death? Yes, some of you, although most of you are on Macs, so I don't know what the blue screen of death is on a Mac. I guess it just stops working, right? You get a gray screen maybe. Well, sorry?
The sad Mac.
The sad Macs. Okay, so sad Mac or blue screen of death, that's just what we refer to it as, is a sign that something's gone wrong with your computer, right? It could be a hardware failure, meaning you could have a hard drive failure. It could be a software problem. One of the things that we look at is how do we make it less likely for you to get the blue screen of death or sad Mac. Because as we've made sort of chips smaller, it's become easier for them to fail miserably. And that's actually a really big issue for computer architects in the future. As we make things smaller, like cosmic rays are more likely to flip bits and cause crazy things to happen, and it becomes quite problematic. Also, as we make things smaller, they die quicker. Like the mean time to failure, how long they'll last and work for, becomes shorter and shorter. Does anyone have, just out of curiosity, anyone have a MP3 player where the battery life used to be like 5 times longer? Yeah, probably all of you who have had it for any period of time. Because circuits decay and their usefulness declines. Just like we get old, they get old too. And how to deal with this so that your processor, so your architecture still works, continues to work, is important. So the approach that I take and my students take to all these questions is, can we pass some information between hardware and software in order to make it so that they can share information to try and help one another out to answer some of these questions or to solve some of these problems. I'm really interested in the hardware-software interface. So my advisor is more at the lower level hardware, and then some of my colleagues in computer science are more at the software level, and I'm like right at the middle. Does anyone know what an operating system is? Yes. What's an operating system? You can give me an example. Right, so like Windows or Mac OS X, it's when you turn your computer on, the thing that's running, right? That you didn't start up, okay? So I like the operating system stuff, and that's sort of the interface between hardware and software, so I kind of fit in the middle there. You need to know some software, you need to know some hardware, and if one doesn't work, you can say, hey, you guys at the higher level need to fix that. Okay, so specifically what do I do? What are some of the projects that I've had students work on? One is figuring out those application traits that I talked about earlier, right? So for these applications where they use lots of data, like for Netflix or Amazon, how do they actually go about finding out that you would want whatever chemistry tests and so forth? So studying those applications for the specific characteristics they have. And once we know that, trying to come up with ways to use that information to make our chips faster or make them less power intensive and so forth. So we've come up with solutions at the hardware level to potentially add new constructs to hardware or new policies. We've also come up with constructs at the software level, changing how the software is written in order to reveal information to the hardware. And then finally, if we come up with these changes, the creative process is coming up with the ideas, right? And then the problem is we have to see whether or not our ideas are good or not. It's kind of like when you bake a cake and you eat it and then you're like, oh crap, I substituted salt for sugar. It didn't work out so well. So that's the last thing that we do is modeling and evaluating the hardware and software changes. So I didn't bring any students with me. That's partially because this semester I don't have any students working with me, so they were kind of hard to bring. But these are some of my former students. 2 of them are still students here. Toma Pigley worked with me this summer. I don't know if anyone knows him. He's also art history, I think, is his second major. And Yeet Aitan, who's one of my students who worked with me last year, he ended up going to Google this past summer, and I'm not quite sure if he's going to Google or Microsoft this summer. But if you were to ask him, he'd probably tell you that a good reason to do research is because then you have something to talk to people at the interview about. And like he came back from his Google interview last year and he was like, you know what, they were really interested in the topic that we were talking about. So that's another reason why to do research. But I also concur with all the other reasons you said, you know, because it's fun. You pick up all these sorts of skills that you need. It also, if you want to go to graduate school, it's a great thing to put on your resume and so forth. So anyway, that's sort of what I wanted to tell you. Any questions? Now that I've asked all of you lots of questions. You don't want to know what I buy on Amazon or what's on my Netflix queue?
What's on your Netflix?
I have no idea.